How does Penn State really feel about losing the top wide receiver in the transfer portal?
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zach Blackerby, and thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. Special guests coming up in just a moment. And then towards the end of the show, stick around because there's going to be an aspect, a win of this transfer portal window that was huge for Auburn long-term that's going to fly under the radar. We're joined by Locked On Nittany Lions host Zach Seyko. One of the things you said when he entered the portal, and you did that quick bio for the rest of the network, and we played it here on Locked On Auburn, you talked about KeAndre Lambert-Smith not being the number one guy, but could be a really solid wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3 for any kind of top program throughout college football. What is it about him that makes you say, okay, yeah, he's limited to kind of being a wide receiver 2?
I think so Penn State asked him to be a leader a season ago. And everything that I've gathered from just following the team, from, being around the local media presence is that he was not that. So what it takes to be a number one, KeAndre Lambert-Smith is talented. He had some really good games, but I think there's just a ceiling to what he can do. And part of that is just attitude. Okay, if you're going to be a number one receiver, you have to lead by example. And then every time it was kind of confirmed that he and Dante Cephas just weren't doing that a year ago. So that's why they bring in a guy like Julian Fleming, and then Trey Wallace is continuing to emerge. So KeAndre Lambert-Smith is good, but then at the same time, he went from being the number one wideout a season ago to essentially being that third option at Penn State. Well, how did Trey Wallace surpass him? And is Julian Fleming supposed to be that much better? Apparently so, because that's what happened. I know there were some small concerns about NIL and everything else. I don't know what Auburn's going to pay him, but it feels like there were more off the field locker room concerns as opposed to the production of what. And again, he disappeared in the final 4 games. That's great that KLS can do these things against Indiana, West Virginia, Delaware, Maryland, right? Some bad secondaries. But when it came to Ohio State, Michigan, and then down the stretch of the final 4 games in crunch time, he was just non-existent. And that was your number one veteran wide receiver. It just something completely changed, and it wasn't for the best.
Talk us through the narrative around him with what he just did throughout spring practice. And then was there kind of was the expectation there that he was going to enter the portal? And if so, when did that kind of start popping up?
If you look at my channel, I have been, I wouldn't say calling for it, but I've been saying, hey, look, Dante Cephas just entered. The same writing's on the wall for KeAndre Lambert-Smith. I have a video that goes back to January of this year that says KeAndre Lambert-Smith will be the next wide receiver to enter the transfer portal from Penn State. And what happened?
Yeah, you're right.
There was no insider. Like, I didn't have any leads for that. That was simply, look, let's put 2 and 2 together. If Dante Cephas just magically disappeared from the wide receiver rotation, KeAndre Lambert-Smith had the same thing. Both of these players are being criticized for their lack of leadership. If Cephas just did this, then doesn't that mean that KLS is going to do the same thing? So then he was there, and players and coaches were saying, hey, yeah, he's had a good spring. He's flashed. That was a common phrase that, KeAndre Lambert-Smith has flashed talent this season. A fifth-year veteran flashing, right? That's not what you say about a guy who's been in college football for that long. You don't say, that's what you say about one of the second-year wide receivers that's up and coming. And then he disappeared from practice. You just kind of noticed and said, like, hey, number one's not around here. KLS isn't at practice. And then it started to slowly.
So you mean disappeared as in he literally wasn't there, not that he wasn't being productive. You mean he literally wasn't there?
Yeah, he stopped at least for the final 7 to 10 days. Was not. We have one media viewing period a week, and in that final media viewing period, he was not there. Then other reporters noticed that, hey, there's nothing in his locker room cubby. There's nothing there.
Oh, interesting.
He's cleared out. And then the report started to indicate that, hey, there were some other grievances that were going on.
Mm-hmm. So when you talk about him not living up to this leadership role at Penn State, was this on the field? Was it off the field? Both? What exactly do you mean by that?
I just don't think that him and KLS and Cephas, and I lump Cephas into this because the two were looked together. This was supposed to be a dynamic duo, and they never lived up to that. It starts with the leadership of the fact that it felt like they didn't do anything extra. They did what they needed to do, but they didn't lead by example. And then Julian Fleming comes in, and it feels like everything's changed as far as, hey, guys are staying later after practice. They're in the film room more often, right? It's just everything has increased. Like the bar has been reset, and it's set a lot higher. Lambert-Smith, just a part of that, just wasn't doing that. And I think it's difficult because the Penn State wide receiver room overall, like that's a lot to ask of him. I don't know how many recent examples that he has of where, like, yes, there is this guy who was rock solid, was a wide receiver captain. Sure, they had Jahan Dotson, and Chris Godwin was well before him, but I'm talking about a guy that, was a graduate or a 4-year player at Penn State and just knew how to work, knew how to be that guy. So I can't criticize KeAndre Lambert-Smith for knowing maybe necessarily what he doesn't know, whereas Julian Fleming had those examples at Ohio State. Now he's bringing that to Happy Valley.
All right, I'm going to ask you to say some good stuff about him now. I'm going to ask you to talk.
Does Auburn need him to be that? Does Auburn need him to be okay? Then it's okay.
I think they need him to be a number 2 or a number 3 receiver that can create space on the outside. I think that's what Auburn needs him to do.
I see him more as a slot. I think he's more effective and quick slants, drag routes. He can play any wide receiver position, but I see he was going to go from the number 1 to being the 3rd option in the slot in Penn State's office. And again, remember, they changed offensive coordinators. So what he had previously, changed. He probably had a good relationship with Mike Yurcich. Yurcich isn't there anymore, so everything's brand new. And Total Nick, he's not going to play favorites.
Sure. So as far as his ability on the field, you mentioned you like him more at the slot.
Yes.
But what part of the field do you like him in short stuff? Do you like him in the intermediate game? Is he any kind of threat deep? Is this the kind of guy where you get the ball in his hands and let him work? What do you like as far as, getting production offensively when you talk about a guy like KLS?
I mean, he's an okay route runner. That was the thing about not only him, but all Penn State wide receivers is that they weren't able to get open. So if Auburn's able to help scheme him a little bit, he can, again, in terms of certain, that's the thing. You look at the tape against Indiana, you look at the tape against West Virginia, those are quality enough opponents. But then when it gets to the best of the best, if a Denzel Burke or a Will Johnson's going to cover him, guys that have strong futures in the NFL, I know that SEC country is littered with that. Right. So KeAndre Lambert-Smith is going to face Denzel Burke and Will Johnson types week in, week out. Maybe not as well. It depends, because if he's going to be the 2nd or 3rd option, okay, then he's going to go up against 2nd or 3rd corners. So if the SEC teams, his opponents, are going to put those Will Johnson, Denzel Burke, Big Ten SEC versions against him, he's going to be pretty ineffective just because that's what we've seen. So I think, again, if he's going to be covered by somebody that's about the same level, I don't know if you've seen the other comparisons. On3 said that he's this year's Jordan Addison or Keon Coleman. And it's like, okay, let's open up the stats real quick. If you look at Jordan Addison's time at Pitt, in one season, he almost had the same production that KeAndre Lambert-Smith has had in 4 years. Right. So that's the comparison we're making. Again, just be honest about what he is. A veteran. I wish Penn State still had him. I thought he'd be a good 2nd or 3rd option in the offense, but he decided to be that somewhere else.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that, Auburn's in a spot they've never been in before. They've brought Cam Coleman in. He's this freshman phenom. He's got a chance to be the best receiver Auburn has ever had. We've just never had a guy like this, a Julio Jones level impact at receiver. We've never had that. We've had guys that we hoped would be, but this guy, he's hit the ground running. You can't guard him in spring practice. Yeah. He's been great at 8A. And so there's other true freshmen that are coming in that are high 4-star guys, and Perry Thompson and Malcolm Simmons and Bryce Kane. But I don't think those guys are going to be quite ready, at least at the start of the season. Perry Thompson may be there a few weeks into it. To me, this is kind of the stopgap to be the guy next to Cam Coleman while these other guys get ready. That, I think, from a timing standpoint, it makes sense. They went out and got another older receiver, Robert Lewis, in the December window from Georgia State. He's been exceptional throughout spring. And Auburn's tight end is really good, Rivaldo Fairweather. And so I just think the way you describe him is like, okay, the fact that this is Auburn's potential 3rd or 4th option in the passing game, depending on how everything shakes out. Like, I do think there is a fit here.
Yeah, and that's what he would have been at Penn State. So this is almost a lateral move for KeAndre Lambert-Smith. I just think it came down to he went in the portal.
Yeah.
Auburn probably offered him a better NIL deal, and he took it. I think that's really what the I think he understands where he's at. It just when people say that KeAndre Lambert-Smith, 24/7 said that he was a high-end draft pick, and if he was that good, Zach, if he was that good, he would have entered this year's draft cycle. There's a reason he's coming back for a 5th year of college football. And again, the numbers don't lie. He has 1,700 career receiving yards. Jordan Addison had 1,400, 1,500 with Kenny Pickett at Pitt in one season.
Yeah, tiny hands, Kenny Pickett. Yeah, I think some of that might be hype generated to being like, okay, you're the top receiver in this portal window. And there's just kind of extra hype added to that because, the portal,
it's true.
The portal windows, it's fun, but at some point, like, he probably is the best receiver, but the bar is what it is.
That's true. No, he is the best receiver in this window, but that's because there's not a lot of other wide receiver transfers in this. It's the same thing. Oh, he was Penn State. Everyone says he was Penn State's best wideout a season ago. That is true. Mm-hmm. That is true, but when you compare to all the other production, it's like a varsity team beating up on a JV team. Of course, the varsity team is going to win.
Sure. All right, yeah. So that is Zach's thoughts on KeAndre Lambert-Smith. I want to get the Penn State side of one of the more interesting recruiting battles happening in this upcoming 2025 class that's coming up right here on Locked On Auburn. And today's show is brought to you by our friends at eBay Motors. I can't imagine buying any other automobile part for my car, truck, or SUV or minivan. We have a minivan, but it's cool. Other than the eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's the formula for winning championships. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle. They've got superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every single time. Or, of course, you get your money back. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Zach Seyko, host of Locked On at Nittany Lions, hanging out with us. So, Alvin Henderson, the running back from Elba, Alabama, a fascinating recruitment. This is a guy who practically lives at the Auburn Athletic Complex, the Auburn Football Complex. Every time there's an open viewing window for media, Alvin is there, and he's getting interviewed all the time by folks. And then all of this kind of starts heating up where he kind of sets his arbitrary date to announce, Zach, and he we kind of get wind like, oh, it's Miami. Miami's making a strong push. And then out of nowhere in the final hour, it's Penn State. It's Penn State. Mm-hmm. What was your perspective on this? And how confident are you in being able to keep the commitment of Alvin Henderson?
Yeah, so from Penn State side of things, at least we started to get rumblings that, hey, this is going to happen. So I never heard Miami. I heard that it was down to Auburn and silently Penn State. And then Penn State was very strategic about this recruitment. Henderson's official visit, or a visit of some sort, I can't remember if it was an OV or not, but a scheduled visit was set, and the weather was supposed to be awful, putrid. And the coaching staff, specifically J1 Sider, who's the running backs coach at Penn State, said, "Don't come up. You're going to have a miserable time. Don't, let's plan for something else so that you can actually enjoy your day here." Like, I think it was supposed to be in the 40s and rainy. And Penn State understands what it's dealing with as far as an environment goes, truly, like the figurative sense of it and then the literal sense of it. So they bring him up. It's a gorgeous day. And then they're able to sell him on everything. And I imagine they've talked about Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen. You're familiar with them from the last game that Auburn hosted against Penn State. And then Saquon Barkley and Miles Sanders. So the track record's there, and J1 Sider has been a part of that now for year after year after year. It's not like he's been there for 1 or 2 years. He's been doing this now for 5+ years.
Sure. And
they continue to churn out the running back talent. So Penn State had a great relationship. I remember seeing posts about them going to basketball games of his, high school games. Like, they were really aggressive with his recruitment, and the dividends paid off. They built a strong relationship with him. I know there's the concerns. Is he actually going to stay committed? And they do have 3 running backs in this class of 2025. I think ultimately one of them will decommit. I can't tell you which one, if that's Barker or Hayes, who's a local in-state kid, and then Henderson. Henderson's is far away, but Barker's also in Florida too. So there's Henderson's the best of the bunch. So I think Penn State's going to work overtime to make sure that they keep a top 10 running back in the nation in this class. But I think they fully intend to have 3 running back commits at the end of the day. Can they do it? Yes. Will they do it? That's yet to be seen.
3 running backs in the same recruiting class? How do you feel about that?
Well, when you have Singleton and Allen projected to go into next year's draft, you are going to have you're going to have an open up competition. Essentially, they have a couple high profile, same thing, high end 4-star recruits that are in 2023, 2024. But again, it's nobody's proven after Singleton and Allen. So I think the same thing of the pitch is Henderson. You can come in and compete as a true freshman for carries and be in and Penn State operates with a rotation. It's not going to be a bell cow. It's Henderson. It's going to be Henderson and somebody else.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how Auburn responds to it. And like, is Alvin going to come up here as much as he was because he's committed to Penn State now? That'll be something certainly to monitor during the fall. But I kind of wonder how the coaching staff has responded to it, because it doesn't seem like they've really pivoted their efforts to other running backs. It seems like they're still interested in him, but I also heard that there is probably a little bit of frustration going on. It was like, we invested so much in this kid, and then out of nowhere, he picks Penn State. So I don't know. I mean, he seems like an emotional player, which I think is good for the most part, but there is some bad that comes with it where like you never fully know where he's at with some things. Sure. But I don't know. I'm intrigued. Alvin Henderson, he's a good player. He's certainly a good player, and he's going to make whichever team that he goes to a better program for sure. It's just, it has been a very interesting and entertaining for the most part recruitment so far.
Yeah, I mean, I like Henderson a lot. Like I said, best running back commit out of the 3 for Penn State. You have the 2 bona fide top tier. I mean, they're gonna be selected pretty high in next year's NFL draft as long as they stay healthy, right? Knock on wood and everything.
Yeah, knock on wood.
Singleton and Allen will be some of the first running backs taken in the 2025 NFL draft, and that just opens up. You have 2 co-starters moving on. So yes, Henderson could hypothetically, if he enrolls early and everything goes well, at least factor into some playing time as a true freshman. Again, the coaching staff worked overtime. This didn't happen by accident. Penn State identified him as a legitimate player. Doesn't matter where he was located in the United States. And they went and got somebody they really cared about as a high school football prospect.
Yeah, no, they didn't show up in Elba by accident. I promise you that. Zach Seyko, how can people check out everything you've got going on?
Yeah, of course, the same thing. All the socials that Locked On Auburn has, subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. I think people, I hope your fan base remembers me from when I was truly a rookie. Like, that was my first Locked On appearance coming on your show.
It was.
And I had the, Cam Newton to TJ Finley comparison, and your comments just roasted me for that. And I'm glad I said it because I was proven right. No, TJ Finley's not a Heisman candidate, but he is better than any quarterback Auburn has last season and going into this season. So to an extent, I was right. I was very much right.
That's a take. That is a take, Seyko. We'll see how they respond to that one. Thank you so much for your time, bud.
Of course, anytime.
There is a win this week that Hugh Freeze and the Auburn coaching staff pulled off. It's going to fly under the radar. That's next, right here on Locked On Auburn. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at Monopoly Go. I've been told I'm a competitive person. Do you think it's true? It is true. I've got a competitive side, and my competitive side is a huge fan of Monopoly Go. I know you've heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great twist on Monopoly, where you can play on not only one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that can bring you big money. And the best part is messing with your friends on Monopoly Go. You can charge them rent on iconic properties, just like classic Monopoly. You also can heist their vaults of riches. And of course, the leaderboards show me who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. It's not me yet, but I'm working on it. Go and get the game and join your friends. It's free. Download Monopoly Go, free in your phone's app store. Once again, download Monopoly Go today. This is going to fly under the radar because when we think about the transfer portal, I think this is going to change over time as we get more and more used to this. It's still new in the grand scheme of things throughout college football. But retaining players is a big deal. We saw this and discussed it a ton this past December window when Eugene Asante chose to stick around. Keontae Scott chose to stick around. I think there's going to be some wins that we don't even know about, but also some that we kind of do know about as far as guys who were considering leaving. And obviously earlier this week on yesterday's show, we talked about it. The duo of Colton Hood and Tyler Scott, they jumped in the portal as far as reports go within 30 minutes of each other. It was very close. It was very close. It's like, oh, dang. Okay. Probably doesn't impact the 2024 season, but could impact the future versions of the roster just because they're younger players, very talented defensive backs. And that's what I said about them when we talked about it on the show earlier this week. Well, evidently Tyler Scott's sticking around, which is huge. He didn't play a ton last year. I think he played a little bit in the Stanford game, and that was about it as far as relevant snaps go, if that is even relevant snaps. But this is a guy we heard a lot of good things about throughout spring, and he's still going to be behind some guys. There's probably 6 or 7 defensive backs ahead of him in the pecking order, and that's okay. That's okay because he's what? He's a freshman, and that's okay. That's okay in all of this. So to me, it's additions like this that are so important because, look, could Auburn have been fine without Tyler Scott? Yes, they could have. But if Hugh Freeze continues to want to build the program through the high school ranks, the general you as a football program, you have to figure out how to keep the guys that you're getting from the high school ranks and make sure they're happy for a few years before it's their time to truly shine within your program. And that's the kind of thing that Alabama and Georgia had the benefit of because they already had that infrastructure in place. And you can say, hey, you're going to get drafted. You're going to probably play for a championship. And if you want to be a part of this, stick around. Auburn doesn't have that luxury yet because they're not competing for championships right now. They're probably 2 years away if everything goes perfect. And so you've got to figure out new ways to do that, whether it's relationships, whether it's NIL, whether it's kind of selling the future and saying, okay, you know what? This is worth it. It doesn't matter what it is. They just needed to sell it. And clearly they did it with Tyler Scott. Do I wish they could have done it with Colton Hood? Yeah, I do. But you can't keep everyone. And we talked about how loaded and stacked and how many different guys are in this defensive back room where they're going to have to wait a few years before it really is their opportunity to shine. But Tyler Scott seems to be more okay with that now than he was a few days ago before he entered the portal. And I think that's a huge win. And I think if Auburn were to add a clone of Tyler Scott in the portal, we'd all be stoked. And we'd say, hey, this isn't a guy that could help us. Maybe he could from a depth standpoint. But the future for this kid is going to be super, super bright. And to me, I think that's worth celebrating. So Tyler Scott, I think we should kind of treat Tyler Scott as an addition to this class, this portal, just because Auburn was able to retain him. And there are probably several other of these that we just don't know about because they don't actually enter the portal. Everything's taken care of as far as the recruiting your own players aspect and what On to Victory has done with NIL and compensation and all of that before it gets to that point. And so maybe Tyler Scott entered the portal and they said, hey, okay, he's worth it. Let's call him one more time and let's figure out a compromise here. But there were other guys that maybe there was some smoke about them possibly entering the portal, then they didn't. The public didn't know anything about it. And that's the goal, right? And so there's a lot of these that are happening. And there's some position groups where it would make a lot of sense for some of these guys to leave. Defensive backs. There's 4 or 5 other guys in the defensive back room that would make sense to say, okay, they probably get a path to playing time quicker somewhere else. Running back is another one. Would it make sense for Damari Oster, Jeremiah Cobb to leave? Yeah, I think so. I think it would make sense, but Auburn is offering them something that they feel is worth it, or they would leave, right? So to me, I think this is something that's going to fly under the radar. And we have till Tuesday. The portal is open until Tuesday. And so things could change. But all in all, so far, I think we need to treat this Tyler Scott not entering the portal news as Auburn getting a guy who's as talented as Tyler Scott, which is a former 4-star guy who has a ton of upside, because that's who he is. That's who he is. So I think that's a huge win, and we needed to talk about that today. For folks who are like, hey, where's Daryl? Daryl's always here on Friday. Daryl was feeling under the weather. So if you made it this far into the show, wanting Daryl, reach out to him, whether it's on Discord or on Twitter. He loves hearing from you guys, and just say, hey, hope you feel better, and hopefully he's ready to dap it up next week. Please like the video. Please subscribe, and we'll see you tomorrow. Nope, we'll see you Monday. This has been Locked On Auburn.